Lisa, yeah. Okay. So the key points I'm intending to go through today are, what do we mean by learning culture? How and why people learn, touching on that sort of thing in terms of some of the adages, new ways of learning, and barriers and enablers. So that's very broad, but much of it is about thinking how can we develop more of a learning culture in our organisations, assuming we want to, and I'm assuming you do because that's why you're here today. So first of all, again, using the how would you describe a learning culture? It doesn't matter whether it exists in your own organisation at the moment, it's more how would you define it? So I suppose how would you recognise it? At least you actually do get free beer. Okay, everybody wants to come and work with you. I think I'm going to give Lisa Hornick the award so far for the fastest fingers on the keyboards. So we've got something about continuous improvement here. And certainly, so that whole thing about being able to always learn from what you've done and to completely always look to better yourselves as opposed to plateau. Absolutely. We've got Vicky saying an environment where learning, sorry, skip down. Vicky saying where learning and development are valued. Yes. And Lloyd said one where people are engaged and willing to learn and develop. I like that as well, because one of the things I think is really key is about that they're engaged in their own learning and they see the purpose in terms of almost want to, they're driving it. You've got to be willing to fail and to make it permission, make it safe for people to get things wrong and to develop, enabling people to continue to develop and taking responsibility for own learning and development. Yeah, I think all of those absolutely fit within a learning culture. Those are good definitions, and we've got a supplementary definition here. An environment, let me let Vicky in, an environment where learning is not only embedded but encouraged across every level of the organisation. And that's the piece that will come into a bit, I suppose, in terms of lots of us are referring to maybe the individual, but also thinking at this strategically, because this is one of our strategy series, making sure that the organisation is supporting a learning culture at every level. So we'll look at it from an organisational level, a management level, the behaviours of the managers, and also from an individual level, because that's how we make sure something is really cultural as opposed to just tactical. In terms of why we might want to do this, any ideas as to what's the business rationale, as if you like, if you were wanting to gain investment or backing from your board about something that you want to introduce in relation to learning and development, what's rationale? Is there anything, why are you interested in this now? Are you always interested in this topic? Is there anything in particular that you think means that focusing on learning right now is so important? Lisa, I haven't got that one on my list, but that's another really great one. So we all need to grow our own talent. So it's about retention, isn't it? So it's difficult to recruit the right people. So and also I think in organizations a lot of the time skills and requirements and technologies are changing really quickly, and so it's often better to train people internally so that they really know how you need to do it in your organization than it can be sometimes bringing people from outside. I mean, that's an interesting one in terms of nowadays compared to 20 odd years ago when I was working in a large blue chip, and it seemed to be a bit of a trend for just buying in skills, which don't always work. Bringing in talent from outside doesn't always fit, whereas actually growing your own, helping people to develop can be much more effective. Yeah, Lloyd, absolutely. So that's a bit linked, that whole sort of things are changing so quickly, keeping up and foreseeing new trends. So we've all got to be prepared to learn and grow. The change in the technologies that we're working with and the opportunities those bring are really key. Support your values, Lise, and absolutely career aspirations. One of the things when you look at what drives engagement in lots of organisations, and certain organisations, we're in a position, aren't we, where let's say people, well, they're thinking about the fact that you can't increase people's salaries in line with inflation at the moment, let's say, but actually what you might be able to do is give people opportunities to learn and grow. And when you think about employee engagement, opportunities to learn and grow is actually a much more of an ongoing motivator for people than just pure reward or money. So people ask for that. And when people were working remotely, one of the whole things about hybrid working was people were fearful about losing their opportunities to learn and grow. So people really value it. I'm generalizing here, but certainly that's one of the things that keeps coming up. That's something that people still want, and they want to have that opportunity to do that. But of course, with people working in, well, still, lots of us are still working remotely or much more hybrid settings. Maybe learning isn't the way it used to be, and they want to experience it in different ways. The other reasons, all of those that you come up with are valid here. This is the information I took from the CIPD report on learning culture, creating learning cultures. People, so this links to the fact that people need to meet your aspirations as a software employee. Fewer than half of UK employees feel that their job offers good opportunities to develop their skills. So that's interesting, isn't it? If actually having the opportunity to develop is a key motivator, and only half of UK employees feel that they have that. If you can offer that, you are giving yourself a competitive advantage compared to others. One of the other things is that case studies suggest that learning provision is rarely fit for purpose when implementing new technologies, which is an interesting one. So often people find that even though there is training or learning given, it doesn't necessarily do what people want it to do. So, I mean, you could look at that in many ways. Is it training people on something that's not relevant to their role? So is it something that's really relevant to their role? Is it very generically rolled out and not specific? There's lots of reasons you can think why it isn't there. But again, implementing new technologies, there's always, here in terms of change management, people say that often technologies don't elicit the benefit that organisations anticipate or want, or the reason they bought them, and often that's because they haven't been rolled out very effectively. The learning and the change management hasn't come with them. Only a third of L&D practitioners feel they have successfully developed a positive learning culture. So if you feel you have, well done. If you are feeling you've still got a way to go, don't worry, you're in the majority. And you can read the other aspects there, which I think we've touched on already in terms of hybrid remote working and employee engagement. So it's really very, very relevant at the moment, never more relevant. And I think during COVID, people were kind of sucking up certain types of learning, but now people don't want to just sit on a call like this or e-learn. They don't necessarily want to sit in front of a screen for a screen's sake. So we have to be more just clearer about what that learning is going to offer and what's in it for people, make sure they feel they get value from it. So why would we want to do that? If you're going to gain investment, the case for building a learning culture, again from the CIPD, and these are aspects that we're seeing here, there's correlational links between a learning culture, the organisations that are growing, they're profitable, they're transforming, and they're highly productive. It also shows where people have got a motivation to transfer learning. So you learn from your own mistakes. And I always think, I used to work for Siemens, and there was an adage inside they would say, if only Siemens knew what Siemens knew, because it was not really poor at internal information sharing. So if you've got a learning culture, then you're more likely to say, oh, by the way, I learned this when I did this the other day, or let me show you how to do that. And people will be more responsive to that give and take. This will obviously impact on organisational performance and job satisfaction, organisational commitment, engagement and turnover. So these are really key aspects of why we want to build a learning culture, and it should be a core strategic aim. So with that in mind, we know not everybody's there. I thought I'd give you the opportunity to indicate using a poll where you'd put your own culture. And don't worry, not going to name and shame. I stole these definitions from e-learningindustry.com. It was online because I had got different terminology before. So just to define them first, talked about chalk and talk, which is a really old-fashioned term. But basically it's saying at this stage, an organisation's got a young learning culture and training technology is minimal. So perhaps you've not got any learning management platform, perhaps learning is just very sort of ad hoc, maybe in terms of that. Then you've got the brilliant basics, and they're saying, and bear in mind these definitions were by an e-learning provider, and not everyone loves e-learning, and e-learning varies widely in terms of the quality of it. But here organisations probably have some sort of learning technology, and they're looking to deepen their understanding. So it doesn't have to be an LMS, but it might be using online tools. Maybe you're using things like we are in Teams or Zoom. And they're just looking to improve. They are looking for advancing ways of learning. They're sharing things. They do internal webinars, maybe lunch and learns. There's more ways in which they are sharing information, but at quite a basic level, and maybe much more sort of like induction or sort of tactical level as opposed to more sophisticated. Then you might go up to sort of investors in people, where organizations are really about talent development. So they're perhaps looking at, behavioral development, leadership development, and maybe training which is aspirational to where people want to go, as opposed to where they are now, just to be able to meet the needs of their job. So that'd be invested in people. And then future gazers would be a very mature learning culture. So where individuals are self-driven learners, you might have quite sophisticated technology, but basically learning is in the blood, if you like, and people have got mentoring and other things going on where people share information and learn. So if you were going to choose your current position in your organisation, I'll pop a poll up for you to be able to choose one of those. So 40% of you halfway through now. And if you want to put in the chat why you've chosen what you've chosen, because obviously, Brilliant Basics quite a lot of you, I can tell you, have chosen Brilliant Basics. In fact, let me share that. So perhaps put in the chat what made you go for Brilliant Basics or Chalk and Talk or investing in people. Is there anything in particular that made you think that's where you'd put your organisation? And maybe the follow-on question, which you don't have to put in the chat, but what would make you go to the next level? Because that will help you think strategically, what would we need to do to feel we were, moving up the level of learning culture? So Lisa, you've got lots of content, but it's not very strategic. So have you got, say, an e-learning system, Lisa, perhaps with loads of like pick and mix courses, or so it's not about that, or is it more about, yes, so you've got kind of catalogue. So the next level of something like that might be where we're aligning content with a role or an aspiration, and guiding people to those sort of things. You've got these very sophisticated platforms, which is about sort of being able to use AI or something to identify learning at the point of need, which is all great. Of course, the challenge is a learning professional's got to define that content in the first place. It's not so easy to do. It's lovely in idea, but these future gazers is great conceptually, quite challenging in reality to make it happen. So at least you've got pockets of it, so it's not strategic, it's not organisational wide. Yeah. So Peter, you've got dedicated trainers knowledge. So did you go for, Peter, did you go for investing in people then? Did you go investing in basics? Okay, fine. So for you then, if it went up, if it was more breadth across the business and it's less sort of siloed, you'd be getting more investing in people. Do you do things like leadership development and things, Peter? And that's for me, when we're starting to develop, I don't know, against competencies or key roles, say, or leaders, management training, that should really be Brilliant Basics, but maybe that's investing in people. I would argue that management training should be Brilliant Basics, but it doesn't always be the case. Got you. So yeah, so you're cusp of it, Lloyd, that's what you're saying. Leadership development, yeah, I mean, for me, we talked, I can't remember if that was on this slide or on the other ones, but the reality is, again, in the UK, we're really shocking at developing our managers. And that has a massive knock-on in things like developing a learning culture when we look at this, and engagement, because it's almost, we get people who are great at their day job and then just promote them, give them some people to manage, and they haven't necessarily learned how to be a great manager. They want to carry on doing their day job. So there's lots of that goes on in organisations. It always has, and we're still pretty bad at it. Okay, so that was our little idea here. So, okay, I forgot. I obviously put a second poll in. I must have taken this. I'll put this up. I think I might have reframed my poll, but let's just see whether we get more information out of this. In terms of there's quite a few of us on here. So let me just go back and put this one up and see whether it makes it easier than going through the chat. So, so this is kind of going to the next level. So although you've labelled it, you can do more than one of these if you want to see there. So quite often we work with financial services organisations, and let's say the learning they've got, they see it as something that they have to do. So someone might have just done I've just seen tick box compliance. So that's ones where they go, oh, well, it's the stuff we've got to almost sit through: bribery, trading, health and safety, these GDPR, whatever it is, these things we have to do annually. And unfortunately, things like that actually kill learning culture in many ways. It's one of the interesting things for me is learning on the job. Actually, lots of learning needs to be self-driven. It needs to be learning on the job. Maybe it's social with other people. The social bit can be harder in the moment in terms of hybrid, but somehow, because people haven't been on a training course, they don't feel they've been developed. And that is another interesting thing in terms of a dependence that you sometimes get from people attitudinally. Also, someone's got a sophisticated blended approach. So I don't know, the person who feels they've got a sophisticated blended approach, if you can give us a little bit of an insight in the chat about that, that would be great to see. Anyone else wants to respond? I've got 52% participation. You can put more than one if you want to, if you can't choose between them. Just getting a feel for what others select. 70%. Brilliant. Okay. Share results. So loads of you got tick box compliance going on again. So it's a bit of the antithesis of a learning culture. So we're trying to develop a strategic learning culture. We've got to balance, because you do have to do that compliance training, but how do we also get positive stuff coming too? So you see a real sort of mix there. And again, it's really, really nice to, you wanted a half tick. A Zoom is quite good, Elise, but half ticks isn't quite there. Active problem solving. I think the problem solving thing is key. It's about, the issue is not sharing, and someone put that as it. So actually people fix things, they learn stuff, but they don't necessarily have the time built in, or it doesn't occur to them to share with other people. That's your next step. So you've got people who are great at learning themselves, but are we creating a culture because it's not getting out to others? All right, so if you were to think yourself how you learn best, let me know in the chat what you would say in terms of that. How do you learn? Last time you learned something, what was the way in which you found it easiest to learn? It's interesting. I don't know what your first name is, I don't know. I think it might be Mike, but I'm guessing. It is Mike, yes. Okay, so I've met you before. I keep wanting to call Maddie because it reads Maddie on the thing. So you're upskilling internal people. Yes. So you're going to be rolling out training internally. That's great. So sorry again, D Hunt, don't know your first name. I'm going to guess David, but I don't know if it's Danielle. Yeah, sorry, there you go, wrong sex and everything. I lucked out on the last one. It is interesting. So people get infected. So is it about the classroom? It's not so much about being in classroom, being talked to, is it? So what you're saying about conversation, Danielle. So you like to be able to interact with others. At least likes a mix of listening, talking, reading, and doing, depending on the topic. Absolutely. Now it's interesting. As you put these chats up, I'll come back to them. When I did my psychology degree, we used to have this thing called Kolb's learning styles, and there's different types of learning styles. People used to say, you know, you have to have an experience, and then you have to reflect on the experience, you create a theory, and then you apply the theory. And certainly those aspects do come into lots of learning. But recently there's been quite a lot of a lot of people are just pushing back on this concept of learning styles. Now, I think there's no doubt that some people do learn through a combination of action, reflection, theories. All of those are valid, and actually the more variety, it makes sense. But having one specific learning style has been disputed. And it's the same way if you've ever done the NLP type one, saying people are visual learners or auditory learners. The reality is we all may have preferences for certain things. It doesn't make us more or less likely to actually learn something. And sometimes our preferences aren't the most effective ways of learning. So that was one of the things that I was looking at the most recent research on this, is that learning styles are kind of poo-pooed now in terms of these things. So I'll go into what people did say is more effective, which actually does link with what you're saying. It's about going beyond learning styles. They're saying that learning should be active. So that resonates to me, where you guys are saying you don't want to be interacting, you want to be doing case studies. Also, they say that it's even challenging. So sometimes you learn less from the things that, well, you learn more from your mistakes, would be an example of that, or something that's hard. you're actually learning more. And that's an interesting thing, because it's human nature to try and avoid things that are difficult, but real challenges, real problem solving is a great example. Learning is also social. So this aspect of, although you might want to reflect on some learning, a lot of it is about learning from others, particularly in the environment, thinking if people are isolated, are they getting that social learning? So more of it is about discussing, learning from others. People learn best when they see the relevance. This is, for me, one of the key parts of building a learning culture. So it's not learning for learning's sake, it's about having a purpose to it. So if I want to go into a new role, or I want to be promoted, or I want to be the best I can be, do I understand why I need to learn? Otherwise, I think that's why people sniff at compliance, even though they should know why. It's because, but they don't see it why. It's to make sure we don't go bankrupt. They see it as because I've got to tick the box for compliance. They don't see it as the sort of the bigger picture strategically. Why? Because we need to be compliant when they feel like it's tick box. So we need to make sure people see the relevance, and that can often be the role of the organisation and the manager to help someone see that, but also for individuals to be self-driven. In terms of learning, feedback, right? It goes back to managers. If you want people to learn and actually do something different, it's all very well knowing what you should do, but actually doing something better. So I had an example with someone that I worked with recently, and I wanted them to have a different style in terms of how they wrote a specific report. And I had said how to do it, and then the key was they've done it differently, and it's taken a bit of time to get to the point where it was better. The key is, it's really easy to go, oh great, that works, and not say anything. And so I did take time to go back and say, actually, thank you, that specifically is what I'm looking for, and these are the reasons why it does exactly what. Now I'm really hoping that person came back to me and said, thank you, that's really helpful to know. So it's remembering to close that loop. If people are giving you what you need from them, tell them. And if they're not giving you what you need from them, tell them, because that's how we learn, through the feedback. And if you don't have feedback culture, then people are going to repeat either the wrong behaviours, or may not be motivated to carry on repeating the right behaviours. And people need some control over their learning. It doesn't say 100%, but I guess they might go, you want people to learn things that are relevant for the organisation, and giving people control and empowerment is the way forward. Okay, so I'm just keeping an eye on the chat at the same time, but I'll keep going in the interest of time. So certainly in terms of the evidence, I must admit these figures were pre-COVID, so I think it might have moved even more. There's a lot more learning compared to kind of classic classroom 20 years ago. So there's a lot of it's on the job, which you'd expect. And I think this is where people don't always acknowledge that they are actually learning or value that. In terms of the 80-20 rule, you're kind of saying that 20% is formal training. Let's say that's classroom or e-learning, and the rest is on the job or social. So that could be learning through others. It could be going on social media and YouTubing it. It's a whole range of things, talking to others. For me, the value in a learning culture is, again, the line manager talking to their people and saying, so what did you learn? Facilitating team meetings where you have social learning, helping people to acknowledge that you don't have to be in a classroom or do a course to have learnt. And some of that is where coaching people is going to help you to do it. The management skills there. So I'm working you hard today in terms of this. So here we've got another. Oh, can I launch that? I think I've got to stop sharing that one to launch this one. I'm hoping you can see that. Yeah, it says Empowered. So how have your people been learning? Or you been learning? Welcome, Nina. I just saw you pop in. So don't worry, you can join in the poll. We've also recorded this if you want to catch up on what we've covered already. So let's see, have you all had a chance to? 61% feel free. The question is, how have your people or you been learning over the last 12 months? Let's see, and you can have multiple choice. So let's see what you are doing out there. All right, so we've got 83% end and share. Well, what I would say is lots of learning going on. I wonder whether it's recognised. So
Googling and videos. I mean, I've got to say, the first I guess Google is one of my first ports of call to go and get the right. Obviously, it's about finding the right sources for things, but it's very valuable to if I'm preparing a webinar, I need to learn. I need to go and get up to speed with what the latest is on various things, and that's often one of the most effective ways of getting to the right channels. Collaboration over social channels, some people are doing that, so that's with working with each other. Interesting that that's relatively low here. Is that an opportunity in the organisations of others? Because we've said that actually good learning is social or interactive, or maybe social channels don't work, you want it to be face-to-face. Still lots of e-learning going on. It has its place, but not on its own maybe, and that's what's quite nice to see, is many of you've got that. External webinars, live content, again, there's great content out there for free, isn't there? Taking advantage of it allows us to do that. Few through books. Books are good for reference, aren't they? But I think they feel quite slow. That for me is one of the things perhaps that happens. And then internal training. See some chat coming here. Yes. Yeah, Mike, I've heard that quite a lot. So Mike's saying he feels that lots of learning opportunities lost as many new starters expect to work from home. They don't absorb general conversation where projects are discussed. And the thing about in the office environment, people are learning without even realizing absolutely that's absorbing it. And it is tricky because I think working from home full time suits people who are experienced in their roles and perhaps have less and the organisation have less to learn in terms of that. It definitely can slow people down in terms of it. So it's trying to get around that in the new world that we're at, that people won't necessarily want to come in 5 days a week, but how do you still manage to get that absorbing that information? And also the culture, actually, because culture is quite hard to do if you're purely remote. Are people purely remote, Mike, or do they come in some of the time? I was saying YouTube, Google's little underappreciated learning tool. I've got to say, yes, it's very good for certain things. Like, how do you turn a hire car on? I had the other day, I had to Google how to turn it on when I was somewhere. So absolutely. Yes, a mixture here. Great. Okay. So just moving on in terms of a little bit more of the theory. So in terms of following on this, some of this content again came from the CIPD. If you want to assess your learning culture, I alluded to this earlier in terms of being more strategic about it and as not just thinking about the individual. So we can think to assess it. And with this, when I'm saying assess, you can reflect on your organisation, because this webinar is about how can you develop a learning culture, strategies for learning cultures. So you could evaluate the effectiveness of your organisation at 3 levels. And if you break it down like this, it's easier for you to address areas for development as opposed to having it in a whole sort of wash up. So in those 3 levels, we've got organisational level, and these are the sort of things to think about. So if you are head of L&D or OD, then this is something that you can control. You might need to get sign off by it in terms of, and by sign off, not say you couldn't define it, but to get it on the agenda so that people other than just you talk about it. And the key piece here is about also aligning your learning strategies with the overall business or organisational vision and culture. So that there's this whole purpose to why people are learning. So what is this clear vision for learning? So I think someone mentioned earlier, new technologies and things like that. So we might want to learn how to do something in order to stay ahead of the competition, or, in terms of our talent strategies. So thinking, why are we doing this? How does it align with the business strategy? And are our leaders supporting this? The other thing is the learning linked to roles or career development? If you want to grow your own, as someone said earlier, you want to retain talent, well, how clearly is the learning pathway? Often there may not even be a career pathway. So if you started with, is there a career pathway for somebody? Or, and it doesn't have to be overly complicated, but how clearly could you group this? Okay, this is a real simplistic, tactical one. If you have got a whole mass of e-learning content or something out there, could you group it or indicate which courses, which books, things like that would be, or learning would be most appropriate for someone who wants to move into role XYZ? Yeah, so it doesn't have to be overly complicated, but could you help group it so that people can then see the type of learning that they need to do or should drive themselves to do to align with a certain role or career? Are people encouraged to share information? Someone said right at the start, is it safe to fail in your organisation? Is reflection on lessons learned positively encouraged? Yes,
Danielle, the deck will be shared and the link will be shared, so we'll send this out to you. Is learning invested in? Is learning passive compliance driven available at the point of need? So, you know, thinking about the maturity. So you can assess your organisation at that level. We then look at it from a managerial level. So in this case, it says, you know, behaviours of our managers again. So have your managers been trained? Do they value training? I will talk about 360 feedback later. I'll just cover it. I'll give you a quick plug, but I'm giving it in context. So for example, when we've rolled out our 360 feedback with line managers, we find that line managers are so much better at giving feedback when they've experienced 360 feedback. So part of that, they know they've got their own gaps and weaknesses. So they've had that. So from a development point of view, it's been useful. But on top of that, they suddenly get why receiving feedback is so powerful. So if no one's given them any helpful comments, then they kind of go, oh, that wasn't very helpful. They realise that they need to do more for others. Or if they've had some really helpful specific comments, they go, that was helpful, I'm going to do it for others. So experiencing something and making sure your managers get, you know, again, things like investing in management coaching or mentoring, all of these things, suddenly they see the value of it because they've had it themselves and they're more likely to pay it forward. So managers play a huge part in your engagement culture, and the same way will be in a learning culture. So have they got coaching skills? Can they help learners to be purposeful? And by that, I mean help hold people accountable. So they don't have to book people on the training course, but if they said, okay, Fred, you're really motivated to move into marketing, what learning do you think you need to do to go there? You know, let's have a look at why don't you do this, or how about you investigate that? Why don't you go and shadow this person? And you know, those are all suggestions, so a bit tell, but they could coach somebody to think about what they want to achieve so that the individual takes control. And also the purpose, so, you know, the purpose for you is career development or high performance, right? Well, if you want to perform, you need to learn this skill, you need to get to grips with this product. So helping the learners understand why they need to get up and learn. It's not doing it for them, it's not even necessarily sending them on courses, but it's helping them do that, which is all part of being a great manager, but not necessarily, not every manager would recognise that. And then at an individual level, here we would go, individual level, sorry, my screen just jumped. Thinking in terms of the people, the majority of the people there, are people engaged? Do they have a vision for what they want or need to learn? So do they have a development plan? Is it linked to objectives? Is it something that they get why they need to develop? Are they aware of formal or informal learning opportunities, and so they can do it themselves and they're likely to? And I realise they is a very generic, you might have some people who do in pockets and others that don't. Do they see themselves as accountable for their own development, or do they sit there and go, no one gave me any training? So you've got that kind of dependency mindset, which is tricky. Do they know where the content can be found? Do they consider it to be relevant and of value? Have you asked them, you know, how effective was the induction or the courses that we have available? And again, do they understand how they learn best and are able to access social learning or different styles of learning as well? So you can refer back to all of these and kind of think yourself of your organisation, how, you know, you could give yourself a mark out of 10 for each of them, couldn't you? And then maybe a couple of pointers which would fit into your learning strategy about the areas you want to develop. You might want to pick a couple from each of those levels that if you were to work on as an organisation, you'd develop much more of a learning culture, so they could be part of your learning strategies. On the next screen here, we've got a few points which are ways in which people can, oh, I've stopped sharing the whole thing. I didn't mean to do that. Let's stick the poll up. Oh, it's because it's on my other screen. So I have to learn how to use Zoom every time I run a webinar. Things they change the functionality every time I'm in it. Poll has been launched. These, I put this up just for as a little bit of an interactive way. Some of them I've already touched on. Some of these questions feel a little bit like we've asked them already, but there's some additional areas in here that sometimes people haven't thought of. So are you using things like manager coaching? So could individuals, these are, I suppose you could see this as a possible checklist for things that you could enable in terms of driving your coaching culture. So we know you've got lots of them, got e-learning and things like that in there. But is it easy for, if you think your managers need training, is it easy for them to get management training? Is it easy for managers to access coaching from their line manager or other line managers? Do you have a coaching program? Do you have a mentoring program? Could you have one of those? And if you wanted to do a mentoring program, I did a podcast on how to set up a mentoring program a while ago, and hopefully Caitlin's listening. I'll ask her to put the link in the show notes into how to set up a mentoring program, because it's quite practical. Are people recognising on the job learning, and webinars and seminars? So it's almost this whole sort of smorgasbord of learning. Which types of these are readily available, and do you want to make more of them available? So it's you see, I can see already, and I'll give to you, if anyone else wants to participate, just ping them in. What I can see is compliance is readily available from anyone, which of course you'd expect, because it's something that's a common requirement. But are the other things as readily available, and therefore could they be more readily available to your organisation? So anyone else wants to complete the poll, please let me know, because I'm going to share it. 3, 2, 1. So you can see lots of you are doing lots of these things. Are they being used strategically? Are they widespread enough? Could you do more of them? Because it's often the compliance, this sort of formal stuff, that's done more regularly. Or do you need more informal stuff as well? That's your last, I think it's your last poll. That's the last poll. There's a poll at the end, but it's not that kind. Okay, so just summarising. Let's pop back to my slides. Practical takeaways. What I suggest, the purpose of this is how to have a learning strategy, or new ideas about learning strategy. First of all, step back and evaluate your overall learning environment that already exists, but don't just do it in a general way. Think of it, segment it into individual, manager, and organisational. And you can almost give a gap analysis as to where you need to develop it. But I would suggest that you want to probably work on all 3 levels if you want to have new strategies. Ask employees what they want to learn and what they think of the current learning. Maybe do a survey. Think about whether or not learning is linked to business need, and if people see that it is. In fact, I think it was Mike said that you're already doing that. So empower subject matter experts to be able to create content and share that. So I saw a number of you are doing learning lunches and things like that. They are really powerful, and so that make those sort of things happen. Also, make learning a priority from day one. Is this something that's supported, or do you have a culture where a manager will say you're too busy, you need to come off that course, where learning is sort of deprioritized? So ensure that people are supported in learning. Think about how it can be social, fun, and part of everyday life, and measure and adapt based on the results. So set yourself some goals as to what you think should happen in your organisation. Don't try and boil the ocean, and adapt based on the results in your organisation, because you know it best. But that whole piece for me that's really, really key is ensuring that people know what they want to learn and why they want to learn it, so that the learning is purposeful. And it's often about it being purposeful, that it might be in order to support your job. So from an organisational point of view, it needs to be relevant to the organisation, but equally the individual needs to see that it's relevant to where they want to go. So it needs to work on 2 levels. And if it's purposeful, people are much more likely to be engaged and motivated to do it. Okay, so that's the core content. We will send it out to you. I'm going to just ping through a few things to let you know that we offer, and if you want to know about any of these, it's no obligation, but I'll just put up the poll to let you know, so we can contact you and just send you further information on any of those if they are relevant to you, which lots of them might be actually at the moment. It's got quite a lot from this, which isn't surprising, because that was my background in terms of learning. So we have an e-learning platform that and also providers of content. Lots of you have got that sort of thing, so we have that available, and those of you who are Actus users can access it within Actus. 360 feedback, I mentioned that. If you've thought about doing 360 feedback, don't know where to start, it's a really powerful tool for managers. We're doing a webinar, just a discovery session, where we run through and show what 360 looks like, and also explain how you can roll it out in an organisation. So there's we'll put a link in there if you want to know more about that. That's happening in next Thursday. So similar time next week if you want to know more, and if for some reason you can't make that session but still want to know more about 360, let us know. I think it's one of the most powerful learning tools that you can use in an organisation, particularly in terms of developing your managers. But that said, also management training, we were running lots of management training over lockdown, things like that. To be honest, I got a bit fed up of doing Zoom training, but we've brought it back. I've had a year or so off. By popular demand, people were getting in touch and saying, you know, will you still do management training online? So I am going to be taking one intake. I'm kicking off in September of management engagement. I do run it in-house as well if you've got lots of people, but if any of you are looking for training for your line managers, it's a 4 modules virtual. They get supported by 360 feedback. I'm running it personally. It kicks off in September. Then do have a look at that. We can send you a full outline if you want to know more. So sorry, there's 3 big plugs there. If you want to know any more about those, we'll send you links anyway, but shout on the poll and we can also just follow up to you. And then we've got our 5th in terms of the webinars in August is all about high performance. So it's about building a high performance culture. How can we do that strategically? We've mentioned the 360 demo. So those are the things that are coming up, and we'll be reviewing our program of events from there. And that's our useful links. So those are all coming out to you. The poll is live, I think, so we will follow up. So you can see quite a few of you have asked for more information, so we'll follow up directly with those. If you don't hear from us, just message us, you've got our details. And I'm just going to check the chat. If anyone has any questions or any specific questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. You're most welcome, you know, and we'll send you the link to the recording, so you'll be able to catch up on the bits we did earlier. Thank you so much for being so engaged on the chat. If anyone has any questions, please feel free. If anyone wants to stop and have a conversation, I will stay on until 5:02 because I have a meeting at 2, but I'll be available if anyone wants to speak. Other than that, thank you so much for joining. That's a webinar topic suggestion. So if anyone has any topics that we want to add to or complete on them, please do let us know. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.